The mind is the last gatekeeper. So when we first start in life, we don't have to have a reason to be joyful. You know, we learn through basically being programmed to release our joy under certain circumstances, external fixes. So we have a very conditional mind as we get older. It becomes more conditional as the years progress. Everything we desire, everything we move forward, um, everything we pursue is just programmed. It's like we think we have free will, but if you really think about it, although there is a lot of options, there's only so many options to experience within the physical shell, within the body. And there is a lot. I'm not saying there's not a lot, but you can only pursue the options that are within your sphere of access. And many people try to push the limit of what they can access to pursue as their desires. We don't really realize the robotic nature of the mind and how programmed it is. The eternal you, the true essence of being, doesn't even really use words. Words are used from interacting with reality through the mind. Because silence, which is the ego's greatest fear, is silence. That's why the ego needs to stay busy, needs to stay readjusting its focus on one thing to the next thing to the next thing. Because if the ego isn't being active, then it doesn't feel like it exists, which it really doesn't. So the fear, the truth and the fear arise. So to stay within the illusion of its false self, it stays active. The ego, just pursues desire after desire, thought after thought. Um, you know, anything to keep the illusion of pride and the illusion of uh, of a worldly worth, not an eternal worth, the self worth. So silence is the key to overcoming the ego, silencing the mind like a pond. Every thought is like a rock in the pond. Once you quiet the mind, you still your thoughts. The water stills, and it becomes truly peaceful. So, like transcending the mind is really to first realize that it's like you're observing your thoughts, you're observing your emotions. You're not your thoughts, you're not your emotions. And once you can kind of just fall back into an observer state, even though they feel like they're still you, but you can kind of somewhat realize that you're observing these things, your thoughts and your emotional states, you'll start to see that there's a gap between the awareness and what the awareness experiences. So, like, the key is really just to silence, stay in silence. The inner silence is the key. Leaning into silence. Don't run from emotions that tend to, be classified as negative emotions. You have to experience them and release them. You can't just keep suppressing them. Experiencing doesn't mean actively trying to engage in them, but let the feeling of the emotion rise without trying to react, but just feel it and don't label it. Because negativity loves the friction, it loves the duality, it loves, to have resistance. Like, don't resist and it will pass. But if you suppress it, that is a form of resistance. So don't suppress things that come up. They need to be addressed. They need to be released. Um, and release is a true form of healing. You know, so triggers that are within our emotional body, it's important to get those triggers activated so they could be surrendered to, you know, surrendered to love. And love doesn't exist within the ego. So, like, a lot of people try to formulate love within their mind, and the mind can only produce lower forms of, almost like shadows of love, but they're not the essence, they're not the core nature of love, because love is formless, love is silent, love is pretty much the opposite attributes of the ego. And most people function, primarily as the ego as their driving force. you know um it's there's I mean I feel like, there's some people that are very, pretty much egoless, but the ego is kind of like the mind is the interface to operate in this reality. Because if you're truly mindless, you would just, you wouldn't really function too much in this reality. Like Ramana Maharshi, he had a long time where he was in a state of just bliss, and his body was deteriorating because he wasn't really functioning in his body. He was in higher realms, operating in like a God state, in that Christ consciousness, the mind of Christ. He was beyond the flesh. So his body suffered a lot, but he didn't really experience that because he transcended the flesh. So I mean, if you go that far with the ego, you won't really tend to the body. Um, if you go that far with, destroying the ego is the mind. It's the operating system that we interface with the world of forms. Because there's three worlds. There's the physical world, there's the astral world, there's the causal world. Well, actually, there's many worlds. I should say there's three planes, and those are the three planes: the physical plane, the astral plane, and the causal plane. And then beyond that is like true heaven. So a lot of people they get hung up in the astral heavens, which aren't the true, eternal heaven. Those are worlds of form. True heaven is formless. True heaven is being one with God in a state of formlessness, where you are basically just in an eternal state of just bliss, and it's just unimaginably, just in an unimaginably peaceful and blissed out and connected to everything and experiencing everything and being everything. That's also known as the Wuji. Uh, that's like the realm of infinite potential. So there's basically those three realms, and they're from what I've you know from what I've come to understand is that the physical realm's pretty big. The physical universe, and the astral realm is massively, massively way more big than that. And then the causal realm is way, way more bigger than even the astral realm. So we're like those Russian dolls, within layers within our own self and within these worlds, you know, basically dimensions within dimensions, and it's like an onion, layers. And then within ourselves, we're layered. The astral body, the mental body, the physical body, the just true essence of the soul being. You know, that again doesn't have language. It just is. It doesn't need to be explained through words. It's just known. So like even telepathy is a form of language that's used, more in the astral realms and the higher realms. But that's not the highest form of language is oneness. Is like being one. It's all so everything's known automatically. There's nothing to communicate. Like Jesus said, I and the Father are one. You know what I mean? So there's no miscommunication. you know, it's like pouring water in two cups. They're both water. Yeah. So what's understood of the water, in one cup is understood of the water in the other cup because they have the same properties, the same essence. You know. So yeah. So destroying the ego. So we have I've heard a wise teacher say that what's left of the ego after somebody has ascended is like that of a burnt rope, ashes. Just little remnants, but very, very, very weak, and has no real hold on the beingness, but it just actually serves the spirit. You know. So yeah, that's why the mind works on loops, emotional, mental, subconscious programming. Loop programming, where like if you analyze just an everyday individual, most people they they may talk about slightly different things in their from day to day, but the way that their emotions peak and react, it's like Groundhog's Day. Like every day is the same, you know, and even their emotional reactions. You know, people don't try to look at things. Most people, I'll say most people. There's people that try to kind of move on that path of enlightenment in different ways. Some people directly, some people on a subconscious level. But if you analyze, like a lot of people, they they don't try to approach things differently. They don't try to act differently. Like most people will find the best character they can put on to try to function like whoever they've come to be. Most of the time is somebody that is the most accepted in social settings. Some people go the other direction and they actually like the awkwardness or being the outcast. But a lot of times people want to be accepted in social settings, so they learn the best way to function. you know so they try to put out this persona that they feel, which a lot of times is again conditional, because not everybody likes every type of personality. but they pick whatever they feel is the most attractive personality they can try to put on their avatar, you know. And but that's a reflection of the ego. Everybody does it. You know, everybody is has their customization of their character. You know, but beyond the physical aspect of it, their personality tends to be something that's not really a lot of times who they really want to be, but they're who they feels it is the most acceptable version of themselves. So they tailor an image to be accepted, you know. And that's just the ego. Again, the ego loves to stay in social settings, loves to stay interacting because, again, the activity keeps it feeling alive. It's almost like an energy vampire, and it needs to stay doing, stay positive or negative, the duality, not true, like, love in a state of 0 point love, but in a +5, -5, +10, -10, you know, so on and so on, state of polarized, you know, over projected superficial goodness or negativity, which are both imbalances, because true goodness, like the true essence of goodness isn't really a projected state, it just is. So when people really try to be good, that's a lot of times because they feel that they're not on a subconscious level. So they have to overdo it, you know, because love is the best way, but love doesn't have to prove itself because love is, love knows its identity. Love knows who it is. You know, love doesn't even have to defend itself. A lot of people will go on these big, defending different, people that were righteous figures, and of course Jesus. A lot of people defend him, and and on a verbal level, and I think, to an extent, that's cool, and I love, I love that we have that in us, but at the same time, you have to remember that God doesn't need anybody to defend him with their mouths. You know, love doesn't need anything to defend itself because love wins because love is what it is. So yeah, and it's okay to defend love. You know what I mean, with your mouth. You know what I mean, because I would always speak that love is the highest way, and I would always speak up for love, but I wouldn't do it with anger. You know what I'm saying? Like, speak up for love or speak up for righteousness, but don't do it from a place of anger. Do it from a place of truth and peace, because the love itself should give you a sense of peace and a sense of joy, so you wouldn't have to defend love with anger, because that's a complete opposite. You know what I mean? Motion or reflection of what love is. So it's very funny that a lot of times that's the duality of this world, this matrix, is that people will defend love with hate, and love is the opposite of hate. So, like, yeah, it's um, it's definitely duality, and yeah. So, I just feel that again, the mind is getting back to the mind. The mind is a tricky thing too, because you'll get out of the mind and you'll get to a place of, like, silence and peace, and then a few interactions, or something comes up and you get back in your head too much, and then all of a sudden you're like, you're just right back in that programming. So it takes time to dissolve the program, to dissolve the the false self, because it's wild. Like, if you really do, like, self-analysis or self-inquiry, you'll see that, like, the the ego is like you, like, you are kind of like, and everybody is, by the nature of this reality, programmed just on your, external circumstances most of the time. You like what you like because you can only know what you pick to like, if that makes sense. Like, you don't know anything beyond what you're shown. And what you're shown, you pick what you like. But there's only so much stuff to pick from. That's why, again, the highest realms, the true heaven is a limitless potential, infinite possibilities, everything and nothing, beyond something you can fathom. Like in the Bible, it says the mind cannot comprehend because it is beyond the mind. The mind only controls those lower three, but to us, it's like amazing because the astral, you have beautiful heavens within the astral, temporal heavens, not the eternal heaven, but, you know, it's very alluring. There's so much, aesthetics and beauty that can just captivate us, you know. But those are still all controlled by the ego, the causal plane, the astral plane, and the physical plane. So it's a very, it's very, it's very tricky, but nothing that can't be understood from the power of silence. The teacher, God speaks through silence, which is kind of counterintuitive to understand, but it's the truth. People always have something to say. Learn to listen, learn to remain in the silence. Although I talk now to communicate, I prefer just peace. I prefer silence. It's nice to have a chat, but in silence, and that when you get in those deep meditative, when you're on, when you just, you know what I mean. You're in a whole another formless state of being where there's just bliss. You know, so the world seems so kind of played out when you hit like higher stages of consciousness and experiencing what it's like. You realize it. You know, the world is also has its little tricks and traps and things to get you kind of hooked. So everything does. That's the game of form. That's the game of physical reality. So we're all just learning to just surrender, to become silent, because you can ascend, you can surpass all these things. These things are really nothing, but they seem like everything. You know, the ascension process is solid. It just takes time and patience with yourself, if forgiving yourself, accepting yourself, and you know, and surrendering. But surrender through love, surrender through um, just releasing all the conditioning within the subconscious. And a great book is A Course in Miracles. Is a dope book. I would say that's a great book. Ramana Maharshi, great teacher. There's some really powerful wisdom that's just right now in out there. You just got to tap in. And everything will, if you keep knocking, everything will be given. So just but keep seeking, keep knocking, and God will deliver.